The day Renata Shea told Corbin Voss to go back to your garage, she said it loud enough for the entire lobby of Callaway Properties to hear. She didn't whisper it. She didn't pull him aside. She stood in the center of that marble-floored entrance hall, her heels clicking against the stone as she turned away from the front desk, saw him standing there in his work jacket with the grease still under his fingernails, and said it with the kind of calm that only comes from never having been told no. "Sir, this is a private building, and frankly, whatever it is you're delivering, use the service entrance. Or better yet," she glanced at the patch on his chest, the one that said Voss & Son Auto Restoration, "go back to your garage." A few people laughed, not loud, just enough. Corbin didn't say anything. He picked up the folder he'd set on the counter, nodded once at the receptionist, a young woman named Bet, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor, and walked back out through the glass doors into the gray October air. His daughter was waiting in the truck. She was 7, and her name was June, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's habit of asking questions at exactly the wrong time. "Daddy," she said the moment he climbed in. "Who was that lady?" "Nobody, Peanut. She was mean, yeah." He started the engine. She was. June watched him for a second, the way kids do when they're deciding whether to push it. Then she turned back to the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass like she was trying to feel the cold through it. "Is it because of the jacket?" she asked. Corbin looked over at her. "What do you mean?" "Tommy Briggs at school says his dad doesn't wear a work jacket anymore because people treat you different." She paused. "Do they treat you different, Daddy?" He didn't answer right away. He pulled out of the parking lot, merged onto Halsted, and drove 2 blocks before he said, "Some people treat you different." "Yeah. That's dumb." "It is. You fix things," she said like that settled it. "That's important." He didn't say anything to that. He just reached over and squeezed her hand once, and she let him, and they drove the rest of the way home without talking about Renata Shea or Callaway Properties or the folder he'd spent 3 weeks preparing, the one she'd never even looked at. Renata didn't think about him after that. That was the honest truth, and she knew it, and it didn't bother her the way it probably should have. She was 38 years old, and she ran the commercial leasing division of one of the largest property management companies in the state of Illinois. She had a calendar that was full from 7 in the morning until 8 at night, and a desk that looked like something out of an architecture magazine, and a mother who called every Sunday to remind her that she still hadn't found a man worth keeping. She didn't have time to think about some guy in a work jacket who'd shown up at the wrong entrance without an appointment. What she did have time for was the Ketterman deal, the Morrison renewal, the 2 contracts on Wacker that needed to close before the end of the quarter, and the gala that Callaway Properties hosted every year at the Drake Hotel, which was in 3 weeks, and which she was in charge of coordinating because apparently that was also her job now. She was fine. She was busy. She was exactly where she'd planned to be. She just wasn't sure some nights that it felt like anything at all. The second time she saw Corbin Voss, it was at a parent-teacher conference. She was there for her nephew. Her sister Dana had called her that morning in a panic. Flight delayed out of Denver, couldn't make it back in time. Would Renata please just go and talk to the teacher? It was probably nothing. It was always nothing. But she needed someone there. Renata had rearranged 2 meetings and taken a cab to Lakeview Elementary and sat in a plastic chair outside room 14, feeling enormously out of place in her silk blouse and her structured blazer, holding a coffee that had already gone cold. He was sitting 2 chairs down. She recognized him before she recognized where she'd seen him. The jaw, the quiet way he sat, the hands folded in his lap, and then it clicked. He looked up at the same time. She watched him recognize her too. She expected anger, or at least coldness. What she got was nothing. He looked at her the way you look at a stranger you've passed on the street twice. Not quite familiar, not quite a surprise, and then he looked back at the door to room 14. "Here, 4, she started, because she didn't know how to not fill silence. "My daughter," he said. "June." "Right." She looked down at her coffee. "My nephew, Theo." He nodded. She waited for him to say something about the lobby, about the jacket, about any of it. He didn't. The door opened and a tired-looking woman in her 40s leaned out and said, "Mr. Voss?" He stood up. He was taller than she remembered. "Thanks for coming in," the teacher said. "June is doing wonderfully. I just wanted to." The door closed behind them. Renata sat alone in the hallway with her cold coffee and a feeling she couldn't name. The gala was in 17 days. She was coordinating with the venue, with the caterer, with 3 different florists who could not agree on centerpieces, and with her assistant Marcus, who was 24 and very good at his job but had made the mistake of telling her that the car service they usually used had gone out of business. "The Drake has a preferred list," Marcus said. "Get me the list." He did. She went through it. Most of them were fine. Big companies, standard fleet, nothing that would embarrass anyone. But the one at the top, the one the Drake's events coordinator had starred with a note that said exceptional for custom vehicle requests and executive transport, was a small outfit called Voss & Son. She stared at it for a long time. "The car service," she said. "The one they starred. What do you know about them?" Marcus pulled it up on his screen. "Family operation out of Logan Square. They do restoration work mainly, but they've got a small transport fleet. Vintage cars, mostly. The Drake uses them for clients who want something with personality. Reviews are," he scrolled, "actually really good. Says here they've done events for the mayor's office, the Art Institute Gala last spring, and the—" "Fine," she said. "Send them the brief." She didn't let herself examine why she did it. She was busy. She just needed the logistics handled. Corbin got the email on a Tuesday night. He was sitting at the kitchen table helping June with a math worksheet, fractions, which she hated with a passion that he found genuinely impressive for a 7-year-old. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at it. Callaway Properties, Events Coordination, Gala Transport Inquiry. He set the phone face down. "Daddy, what's 7/8 minus 1/4? Convert them to the same denominator first." "What's a denominator?" "The bottom number." "Why is it called a denominator?" "Because someone decided to give it a fancy name to make math harder." She laughed, and the laugh made something in his chest loosen the way it always did. She had her mother's laugh, big and slightly ridiculous, all breath and no filter, and every time he heard it, he thought, "At least I got that part right." He'd gotten a lot of things wrong. He knew that. He'd stayed in the army too long, thinking the deployment extensions were temporary, thinking Karen would wait. She hadn't. She'd left when June was 2, and sent the divorce papers from her mother's address in Phoenix, and he'd signed them at a forward operating base in a country where everything smelled like dust and diesel. He'd come home 14 months later to a daughter who didn't know his face, and a house that needed a new roof, and a small inheritance from his father, who'd spent 40 years running the auto restoration shop on Kedzie, and a choice about what to do with all of it. He'd rebuilt the shop. He'd expanded it. He'd added the car service division 3 years ago when he realized that the vintage vehicles they restored were worth more to people as an experience than as a sale. He'd built something. It wasn't what he'd planned, but it was real and it was his, and it paid for June's school and the house and the roof he'd eventually fixed. And now the woman who'd told him to use the service entrance was asking for his cars for her company's gala. He looked at the phone for a while, then he looked at June, who was now drawing a face on her eraser instead of doing fractions. "Peanut, I'm thinking. You're drawing. I'm thinking while drawing." He picked up the phone and opened the email and typed a professional reply, confirming availability and requesting the event details. He didn't mention the lobby. He didn't mention the jacket. He just answered the question she'd asked. The logistics call was scheduled for the following Thursday. Renata had expected to deal with an assistant, or a scheduling system, or at minimum a layer of insulation between herself and the actual person she'd told to use the service entrance 8 weeks ago. What she got was him, on the phone, answering on the second ring with a voice that was unhurried and specific, the kind of voice that had clearly learned how to give instructions without raising it. "This is Voss." She'd paused for just a second. "This is Renata Shea, Callaway Property. Ems, Shea, I have your brief in front of me." He walked through the event details efficiently. 12 vehicles, 6 pickup locations, the specific timing requirements for the pre-event reception at 6:30 and the main arrival window between 7 and 7:45. He asked clarifying questions about the VIP tier, which guests needed to be prioritized, whether there were any accessibility requirements, what the fallback protocol was if a guest's flight was delayed. He was good at it. She kept waiting for him to say something else, to let it become something it wasn't. He never did. "I'll send over a confirmation and the driver assignments by Monday," he said. "That works." A pause. "Anything else you need from me?" he asked. She almost said it then. Almost said, "I owe you an apology. I said something in that lobby that I shouldn't have said, and I said it loudly, and I didn't look at the folder you brought, and I don't know why I was like that, except that I was in a bad mood and you looked like an easy target and I'm ashamed of it," she said. No, Monday is fine. Then I'll talk to you Monday. He hung up. She held the phone for a second, and then she set it down on her desk, and she sat in her chair that cost more than she'd made in her first year of work, in her office that looked out over the city she'd spent 15 years building herself into, and she felt, for no reason she could explain, like something was sitting directly on her sternum. The night before the gala, June got sick. It started at dinner. She pushed her food around, said her stomach hurt. Then by 8 o'clock she was running a temperature of 102 and crying quietly in a way that broke something in Corbin every time, because June was not a crier. She was a fighter and a talker and an arguer, but she did not cry unless it was serious. He stayed up with her. He made her the soup she liked. The chicken one from the can, not homemade, because she'd decided at some point the can version was superior, and he'd stopped arguing about it. And he sat on the edge of her bed and read to her from the book they'd been working through together, the one about the girl who discovered she could talk to animals, even though June fell asleep before he got to the end of the chapter. He sat there after she fell asleep. He thought about calling in. He had 2 other drivers who could handle the morning logistics. The gala didn't need him specifically. He could send Marcus, his own Marcus, the driver he'd hired 3 years ago, who was better behind the wheel than Corbin was on his best day. And it would be fine. But he'd quoted on this personally. He'd made the assurances about the VIP tier personally. And there was one guest on that list who had specifically requested him by name, a request that had come in through the Drake's coordinator with a note that said Colonel Harlan Greer has asked if the owner of the firm would be driving him personally. He says you served together, Harlan Greer. Corbin had stared at that name for a long time. He'd served with Harlan Greer in 2 rotations, the second of which had ended badly enough that Corbin still sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning and lay there counting the sounds of the house until his breathing slowed. Harlan Greer, who'd been a lieutenant then, like Corbin, had sat with him in the dark more than once during that second rotation and not said anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. He arranged the neighbor, Mrs. Pelletier, to come sit with June until he got back. He kissed June's forehead once, and she stirred but didn't wake, and he drove across the city in the dark at 5:45 in the morning with the radio off. The gala went smoothly. Renata had spent the previous week imagining 17 different ways it could go wrong, and almost none of them happened. The centerpieces were wrong, but not noticeably wrong. The caterer ran out of the vegetarian option for the second course but recovered. The speeches ran long but not ungodly long. What surprised her was the cars. She'd expected fine. She'd expected professional. What she got was beautiful. 6 vehicles that looked like they'd been restored from film stills, each one detailed to something just past perfection. Drivers who were punctual and quiet and somehow managed to make every arrival feel considered rather than managed. She noticed him right away. He was driving the primary VIP vehicle, a deep Navy 68 Lincoln Continental that she later found out had taken 18 months to restore. He stood beside it at the curb the way men stand when they're very certain where they are, jacket pressed, not looking at his phone. She crossed the turnaround to speak to him. She didn't plan to. Her feet just went. "Everything looks great," she said. He turned. "Good to hear. No issues so far. The Lincoln is," she gestured, inadequate. "Incredible. My father found it at an estate sale in Peoria, 1994. He kept it in the back of the shop for years before I finally let myself take it apart." She looked at the car, then back at him. "I owe you an apology." He was quiet. The lobby, 8 weeks ago. She kept her eyes on the Lincoln because it was easier. "I was rude and loud and I didn't look at whatever you'd brought in. I don't have a good reason for it. I'm sorry." She heard him exhale, slow. "You've had a chance to look at it since?" he asked. She turned. "What?" "The folder. The proposal." She blinked. "We use an in-house restoration firm for..." The proposal wasn't about restoration. She looked at him. "I was there to propose a transport partnership," he said. 3-year contract. Preferred rates for Callaway clients. I'd been going through your events coordinator for 6 weeks trying to get a meeting and kept getting routed to voicemail, so I came in." He paused. "The folder is still at your front desk, I'd imagine." Bet promised she'd keep it. Renata felt the specific cold feeling of having made a decision about something she hadn't actually understood. "I'll look at it," she said. "I know," he said. And then, because a black town car was pulling up and he was on duty, He excused himself and walked back to the Lincoln and opened the rear door for a man in his 60s who stepped out in a dark suit and immediately scanned the turnaround with the quiet efficiency of someone who learned to assess spaces a long time ago and never stopped. The man saw Corbin. His face changed. "Voss," he said. "Not Mr. Voss. Just Voss, the way you say someone's name when you've said it 100 times in difficult places and it means something solid. God, it's good to see you." Corbin shook his hand. Colonel Greer. Renata was close enough to hear. She wasn't trying to listen. She'd started to turn away. But she heard the way Corbin said that name, the particular register of it, the way a person says the name of someone they'd trust in a room where trust was the difference between one outcome and another. She stopped. The Colonel, Greer, had his hand on Corbin's shoulder. He was saying something that she couldn't quite catch, something about the guys and a ceremony in the spring, and then, clearly, "You should have gotten the commendation on the record. I've been saying that for 3 years." Corbin said something quiet. "No, I know," the Colonel said. "I know you didn't want the attention, but it's documented now. You should know that." He paused. "Your daughter, June, right? She doing okay?" "She's sick tonight, actually. 102. The Colonel's face creased. "You should be home. She's got Mrs. Pelletier. She's okay, Voss. She's okay, Colonel." Greer looked at him for a long moment, the way people look at someone they know well enough to know when the argument is over. Then he clapped him once on the shoulder and turned toward the hotel. He walked past Renata and paused. "That man," he said, and he nodded back toward the Lincoln, toward Corbin, who was already moving to the next vehicle in the line, drove into a situation in Kandahar that everyone else was driving out of, brought back 3 men who wouldn't have come back otherwise. He looked at her. "Whatever he's selling, I'd buy it." Then he walked into the hotel. Renata stood on the turnaround of the Drake Hotel in her good coat, with the October air cold on her face, and watched Corbin Voss open a car door for an elderly couple, who thanked him warmly, and he smiled at them. A real smile, easy and unhurried, and she thought, "I didn't look at the folder. I didn't even look at the folder." She called the main line for Voss & Son at 9:15 on Monday morning. She did not go through Marcus. She did not route through the Drake's coordinator. She called the number herself, standing at her desk with her coffee in her other hand, and when he answered, "Voss," she said, "I read the proposal. A beat. And," he said, "your rates are lower than our current firm. Your vehicle inventory is better, and 3 people at the gala asked me independently who the car service was, which—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I'd like to discuss the partnership." "All right. There's a question I need to ask you first." "Okay. Is there any reason you wouldn't want to work with us, with me?" After. She stopped again. Given the history, he was quiet long enough that she thought the call had dropped. "Then I don't carry things that aren't mine to carry. The lobby, that was yours. You've dealt with it. We don't have to keep dealing with it." She set down her coffee, picked it back up. "Okay. What time works for a meeting?" She met him at the shop on a Wednesday in early November. She hadn't known what to expect. She'd seen the cars, but the shop itself surprised her. It was large and meticulously organized in the way that only comes from someone who'd learned organization somewhere that required it absolutely. Every tool had a place. Every surface that wasn't in active use was clean. The walls had photographs, older ones, cars in various stages of restoration, and one framed photo near the office door that showed a much younger Corbin Voss in uniform standing, with 4 other men in front of a vehicle that had clearly seen significant terrain. His daughter was there. She was sitting at a small desk in the corner of the office. The fever had broken by Friday, apparently, working on what appeared to be a drawing of a horse. She looked up when Renata came in, assessed her with the frank curiosity of a child who'd learned to take her cues from her father's reaction to things. "You're the mean lady from Daddy's building," she said. Renata stopped. Behind her, Corbin said, "June, it's okay," Renata said. And then, to the girl, "You're right, I was." She crouched down to eye level. June was small for 7, or maybe just more compact than the image she'd built from her father's stories. "I was rude to your dad, I'm sorry." June looked at her steadily. "Did you say sorry to him too?" "Yes." "Good." She looked back at her horse. "His feelings count more than mine because you were mean to him, not to me." Renata blinked. "She's very literal," Corbin said behind her, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite suppressed amusement. He crossed to the small desk and set a box of crayons near June's elbow without comment, and she grabbed the dark brown one without looking up, and the ease of it. The specific, practiced ease of two people who knew each other's rhythms completely hit Renata somewhere unexpected. She'd grown up watching her own father operate the same way. He'd been a foreman at a metalworking plant in Gary, Indiana, and he'd come home at 6 every night and checked in on the homework and set things next to people without being asked and never said more than was needed. She hadn't thought about that in a long time. She pulled out the proposal. They sat across from each other at the work table he'd cleared, and they went through it line by line, and she asked the questions she needed to ask. Liability coverage, insurance limits, driver certifications, minimum vehicle count, and he answered each one specifically and without defensiveness, and at some point she looked up and he was already looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing. You were about to say something." He considered that. "I was going to say that you're different here." She waited. "In the lobby, you were playing a role. This is what you actually are." She looked at the papers between them. "A negotiator? Someone who's good at their job," he said. "It's different." She didn't know what to do with that, so she went back to the proposal and asked about the fuel surcharge clause. The partnership agreement was signed in December. Her mother called on Sunday as usual. "How's work?" "Good. We signed a new transport firm." "Renata, I don't ask about work. I know. I'm asking about your life." She looked at the window. It was snowing, which in Chicago in December meant it was going to snow for the next 4 months, and everyone knew it and just kept going anyway. "There's someone," she said. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. "He's not who I would have. He's different from what I expected." Different how? She thought about the photograph near the office door, the cars, the shop that was organized like something important happened there, because something important did. June and the crayons and the horse drawing and his feelings count more than mine. "He's a good father," she said. Her mother was quiet a moment. Then, "That's a start." The first time she saw him outside of a professional context, it was by accident. She was at the farmer's market on Green Street. She went every few weeks when the calendar allowed it, which was not often enough, which she was aware of, and she rounded the end of the cheese booth and nearly walked into him. He was holding 2 bags and June was holding one, and she had a hat pulled down over her ears that was 3 sizes too big, and she looked like a garden gnome with excellent posture. "Hi," June said immediately. "Hi," Renata said. She looked at Corbin. He looked at her. "Cheese," he said, and held up one of the bags. "Cheese," she agreed. June looked between them with the patience of someone who was used to adults being strange. "We got the sharp kind," she said. "Daddy doesn't like it, but I do, so we got both. Smart compromise, I know." She paused. "Are you getting anything?" "I was going to get vegetables." June considered this. "We could walk together," she said in the tone of someone who'd decided this was happening. "If you want. Daddy, she could walk with us, right?" Corbin looked at his daughter and then at Renata. He had the particular expression of a man who knew his daughter well enough to know that disagreement was possible in theory only. "If she wants to," he said. Renata looked at the vegetable stalls, which she didn't actually need to visit urgently. She looked at June, who was still wearing the enormous hat and holding a bag of cheese and waiting with serene confidence. "Okay," Renata said. They walked for an hour. June narrated most of it. She had opinions about the winter squash display, too many orange ones. Strong views on which booth had the best apple cider, the one with the dog outside, always, and a genuine curiosity about Renata's job that she expressed in the form of a rapid-fire series of questions that Corbin eventually said, "Peanut, give her a breath," and June said, "I'm just asking," and kept going. It was the most Renata had talked in a Saturday morning, and she couldn't remember how long. At the end they stood near the parking structure, and June hugged one of the bags to her chest and said with complete seriousness, "We come most Saturdays if you wanted to come again." "June," Corbin said. "I'm just saying she could." He looked at Renata. "You could if you wanted." She looked at him. At June. At the enormous hat. "I'll think about it," she said. She came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. In February, there was a night when the pipes in the shop froze and burst, and Corbin called her at 11 to cancel a vehicle pickup scheduled for the next morning, and somewhere in the logistics of rerouting the client and the problem-solving, they talked for 2 hours. She was sitting on her kitchen floor with her back against because she'd sat down to take the call and then just didn't get up. She told him about her father, about Gary, Indiana, and the metalworking plant, and how she'd decided at 15 that she was going to build something different and had spent the next 20 years doing exactly that, and had arrived at 38 with the things she'd built and not much else. He told her about Kandahar. Not the part Colonel Greer had mentioned. He didn't bring that up, and she didn't ask, but the other parts. The long days that were nothing and the specific loneliness of being somewhere loud and dangerous that still somehow managed to feel very empty. Coming home to a daughter who'd looked at him like a stranger and the 6 months it took before she started calling him daddy, instead of just looking at him with careful eyes. Did she ever? Renata started. Yeah, he said. She got there. How? Time, and I just kept showing up. That's mostly what it is. She thought about that. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just not complicated. There's a difference. She sat on her kitchen floor for a moment in the quiet. I'm bad at that, she said. The not complicated part. I know. She laughed, surprised. You know? You rerouted that client in about 40 seconds tonight. You had 3 backup options before I finished explaining the problem. He paused. That's useful. It's also a way of staying ahead of things so you never have to sit in them. She didn't say anything. The lobby, he said. You apologized fast. First chance you got, I meant it. I know. I'm saying staying in it a little longer. Letting it be what it was, that matters too. She thought about the folder sitting at the front desk for 8 weeks while she went to meetings and managed calendars and didn't look at it. Yeah, she said. They stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes, not about anything. In April, Corbin got a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. A formal commendation, the thing Colonel Greer had mentioned at the gala, finally processing through on the record. There was a small ceremony at the regional office downtown. Not big, just formal. Greer would be there. A few others. He almost didn't tell her. He told her. She came. She sat in the 3rd row with June, who was wearing a dress for the occasion and had her father's dark eyes in her grandmother's hat, which was still too big. June had asked approximately 40 questions on the way over, and when Corbin came to the front of the room in a uniform he hadn't worn in years, which still fit, because he was that kind of precise, June grabbed Renata's hand. Not dramatically. Just grabbed it and held on, the way kids do when something is big and they want an anchor. Renata held on back. Colonel Greer read from the citation. The words were formal and specific and described a morning in a place very far away when several things happened that nobody with any sense would have chosen to be in the middle of, and Corbin had put himself in the middle of them for reasons that the citation called extraordinary valor, and that she suspected he called something else entirely, something quieter. She watched him stand at the front of that room and receive it without performance, just a nod and a handshake and a quiet word to Greer, and she thought about the lobby again. The way she'd said it, so loudly, the way she hadn't looked at the folder, the way she'd made a decision about him based on a jacket and a moment, and her own bad afternoon, and she thought, I almost never found out. I was so close to never finding out. Afterward, June looked up at her and said, Did you know Daddy did that? Not until tonight, she said. June considered this. He doesn't talk about it. No, he talks about other stuff. He talks about the cars and about me and about the shop. She paused. And lately he talks about you. Renata looked at her. He does? Mm-hmm. She was entirely calm about this. He says you're different than he thought. Renata was quiet a moment. What did he think? He thought you were like the building, June said. All marble, no feeling. It was such a specific thing to say that Renata nearly laughed. And now, June shrugged with the elaborate casualness of someone who had clearly thought about this a great deal. Now he thinks you might be like one of his cars. What does that mean? It means, June said patiently, that you need work, but you're worth it. She told him what June had said on a Thursday evening in May when they were sitting on the steps outside the shop while June was inside finishing a drawing. He was quiet for a moment. She's 7, he said. She's right, Renata said. He looked at her. The evening was warm enough to sit outside without a jacket for the first time since October, and the streetlight at the end of the block had come on, and somewhere inside the shop, June was probably drawing a horse or a dog or a car she'd decided was her favorite. I came to that lobby, he said, and I told myself it didn't matter the way you said it, but it did. A little. He looked at the sidewalk. Not for long. I've been dismissed by people with more authority and better vocabulary. But in front of Bet, he almost smiled. She looked so uncomfortable. I owe Bet an apology too, actually. Probably. She looked at the end of the block. I've spent a lot of years building things that look solid from the outside. And then I walk into a shop and there's a kid with a horse drawing and a guy who drove into Kandahar for 3 people he barely knew, and I think, she stopped. What? he said. I think I was building in the wrong direction. He didn't say anything to that, not right away. He just sat with it, the way he sat with things. Not rushing it, not filling the quiet, and that itself was something she was still learning from. Then he said, "It's not too late to change direction." She looked at him. "You think? I've rebuilt cars from worse." She looked at the shop behind her, at the window where June's silhouette was bent over her desk, small and focused and entirely herself, at the door with the photograph and the tools on the walls and the Lincoln that had taken 18 months and was worth every one of them. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. But she stayed until June finished the drawing, and when the girl came out and showed it to her, a horse, just as she'd guessed, with an enormous mane and small careful hooves. She looked at it seriously and said, "The hooves are really good," and June beamed and said, "I know." And Corbin looked at both of them with an expression she couldn't quite name except that it was the opposite of empty. And the evening light came down through the Chicago air and she thought, this is what solid actually feels like. This, right here.